our masterclass series with Slane Whiskey. We are with Alex Cunningham, co-founder of Slane, and we're talking all things about sustainability today. So, Alex, good to see you again for our
likewise.
And let's talk about Slane. Like, Slane has a very unique way of handling sustainability. Talk to us.
Yeah, it does. So for me, it actually goes all the way back to when I was a kid. So, you know, I grew up on Slane, in the castle, the village close by. We're a close-knit community, and the 1,500 acres that surround the castle and Slane Distillery, they are very beautiful, but also very important, not only because they contain a lot of architectural heritage like the castle, but also immensely important biodiversity habitats. We've got, you know, the Boyne River, which provides our water for the distillery, is also home to kingfishers and otters and lamprey and lots of other protected species. And it's an area called a special area of conservation, which gives it international protection. So I knew that we were growing up in a very important place for lots of reasons. And when my dad and mum were running this place back in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, Dad had thrown the doors open and welcomed people in through the Slane concerts. We had a restaurant here. We even had a nightclub in the old kitchen, which Dad had started. And the reason for doing all of those endeavors and working really hard was to try and pay the bills and hold on to the place. And I remember I must have been about 9 or 10 years old, and we were out walking on the farm, and I asked Dad about the responsibility of owning a place like Slane. And he was very quick to reply, and he said, "Alex, listen, you have to understand, when it comes to your turn, you will never own Slane. You are just here to protect it for the next generation." So we're kind of custodians, if you like. And, you know, with my wife, Karina, who's an extraordinary human being, but we do lots of things, you know, other than the whiskey. We're organic farmers. We have a proportion of the land that we devote exclusively to raising organic produce. And from that, I guess I've learned that the relationship between us and the land and our community is really important. And so I want to go beyond protecting it for the next generation. And ideally, if I can, you know, we'll try and leave things a little bit better than when we arrived. So protect and enhance has kind of been my driving mantra for how we behave in our environment. And Slane whiskey, you know, for us is part of that, because what's going to keep my family here, but more importantly, protect this amazing landscape and the people and the wildlife and everything within it, and the architectural heritage, is that Slane whiskey will hopefully secure its collective future. So for me, it's much more than a whiskey brand. It's an empowering tool that's here, that's going to build and enhance and make this place protected, but obviously hopefully better in time, and we'll continue to welcome people here, not just for the gigs, but now to the distillery. So that's the guiding mantra. And when we had the opportunity to design a distillery, we put that lens on. So if you look at how we grow our raw materials, because that does make us a little different in that we can grow our own barley right here on site. You know, barley is quite a greedy crop when you put it in the ground. So in days gone by, and that would have been true of ourselves as well, you know, you plant your barley, you take it off the land, you leave the field and stubble, and you don't do anything until the next season. What that does is it leaves the soil bare, you're not putting any nutrients naturally back in, and ultimately you deplete your organic matter over time. So now we do things a little differently. So we use crop rotation. So we intercrop with other crops to naturally re-energize and put organic matter into the soil. So our winter barley crops might go into a brassica or something else, like a rye vetch mix with stubble turnips. We can then plow that stuff back into the soil. So we're not cropping it deliberately. And that breaks down in the soil and provides natural nutrients for the microbes and everything else in there. And ultimately, when we then go back and plant barley in it, that then reduces the amount of artificial fertilizers and everything else we would have to use. Plus, the cover crop is protecting aggressive stuff from wind and the sun, and also things can live in that crop in between us growing the barley. In addition to that, we're lucky enough to have some beautiful woodland here, some of it very old woodland, and that has a really immensely important biodiversity value. The problem is that a lot of woodlands exist as islands because the field margins, a lot of the traditional hedgerows over time have been removed. Now, Ireland's pretty good on having hedgerows, but we are actively planting additional hedgerows that acts like little kind of motorways or highways for the wildlife to move around between the blocks of woodland. So you're enabling the wildlife to move around the farm. And in some cases, we've even done agroforestry where we'll plant trees in the barley fields, and underneath the trees and in the trees, you'll get life that will actually help to naturally manage the pests that exist in the crop, thereby reducing our dependency on artificial pesticides, etc. So it's about trying to lighten our footprint in the landscape. So that's, and I haven't even got to the whiskey yet, but then when we came to designing the distillery, you know, again, we wanted to be traditional, like we covered in the last session. So yes, we use triple distillation, we use copper pot stills, but for example, in the fermentation, we don't use stainless steel, which you can get great, you know, if you clean that with a chemical, it's great for hygiene, but I wanted to go a bit more old school. So we use timber washbacks, which are more old school, but actually it's a more natural material. And I believe making whiskey should be working with, not against nature. So we use steam to clean. We don't use chemicals to clean those timber washbacks. And the microbes that will live in the wood or in the gaps, they'll feed on the sugars and actually lend positive flavor notes to the distillery. And then when it came, so that element's very traditional, but distilleries, you know, there's no getting around it. They need a lot of energy. Okay, so we use LPG as a fuel at the moment because it's cleaner than oil, for example, but it does create a carbon footprint. So we looked at how we could reduce that. So we built in a lot of heat recovery. So every time we're heating something up, we're also cooling something down. So we have a lot of plate heat exchangers, and that effectively allows us to use significantly less energy. We also figured out a way to deal with what some people would consider a waste stream. So distilling, you're after that sweet alcohol. That's what you want. You extract the alcohol, but there's going to be stuff left in the still after distillation, which is effectively the remaining carbohydrates that the yeast didn't get to. And that's called pot ale or spent lees. Now, some distilleries will actually cart that off site and send it to a waste treatment plant. We didn't want to do that. So we've built in an anaerobic digester on site that will actually take that waste product, feed it to microbes that can munch away on those remaining carbohydrates, and they create something called methane or biogas, and that can be collected and ultimately burnt directly on site to help heat the stills. Now, it's not up and running yet because we need to get production up to a certain level, but when it's commissioned, that will immediately reduce our carbon emissions by over 30%, close to 30, yeah, so in around 30%. So that's a massive CO2 saving. So, you know, we're trying to reduce the footprint of how we grow our materials, but also how do we reduce energy consumption when we're actually making the whiskey as well. And then we've got some fun things that we designed in, you know, rainwater, again, plenty of that in Ireland. So we're harvesting the rainwater off the newer buildings in the distillery, and we can actually use that in process as well. So that reduces our water consumption. And then the biodiversity impact, we actually, so part of the distillery borders the old walled gardens for the castle. And this would have been a source of vegetable and fruit production historically. There's been no fruit trees in there for a long time, but we actually planted, for the first time in over 100 years, new fruit trees. But we actually worked with a firm called Irish Seed Savers that uses old heritage varieties. And we built effectively the first stage of a garnish garden, which will allow visiting people and our own bartending team to collect their own garnishes on site and make drinks. You know, here using stuff that we've grown ourselves. So it's all about, you know, tying tying it into a way to where you can give back or reduce. That's what we do.
Excellent. One thing that I didn't hear, and I know that is definitely a sustainable measure as well, is the barrels.
Yes,
Talk a
yeah,
little
you're right.
about your barrels and your relationship with Brown-Forman here in the States.
Yeah, so Brown-Forman, being the whiskey company that does make its own barrels and has two cooperages, one in Kentucky, one in Alabama, they take their wood sourcing very seriously in terms of a responsibility. So there is no clear felling. It is, select stem approach. They minimize their waste, their energy. They look very closely at energy, water, and waste in terms of their wood production. So our barrels are from sustainably sourced timber. Our Oloroso sherry casks as well, which we source from Spain, not from Brown-Forman, they apply the same logics as well. So they're very careful about the wood sourcing. So timber is a big part of our industry, and we need to make sure that we're sourcing that in a responsible manner as well. And for example, this winter, I'm going to be planting a pretty sizable new oak plantation right here in Slane. So it'll be all native woodland. It'll include oak. And who knows, maybe one day when I'm long and gone in 50 to 100 years time, maybe some of those trees will be turning themselves into barrels as well.
Awesome. What happens to the barrels once you've used them, once you've taken them from Spain and from Brown-Forman and other sources? What is the next life of the barrel after Slane?
So firstly, in terms of reusing barrels, so you can use a barrel more than once. Typically we can use a barrel up to 3 times. Some people will push it to a 4th use, but most of the flavor has, I guess, been surrendered by then. So you're not going to get a whole lot out of the barrel. So after its 3rd use, internally, we can then offload those, and they can become, boutique furniture. They can become planters for your garden. We're now working with a chef on site, guy called Keith Coleman. He's going to be doing a fermented hot sauce using one of the barrels. So yeah, we find creative ways to use them. They definitely don't go to waste. And of course, the other thing you can do is, which I like to do at home, is you can chip those barrels and then you can use them to cook as well. So they do. There's plenty of life beyond whiskey, that's for sure.
Excellent. Let's see. So we talked about farming. We talked about energy sourcing, right?
Yep.
Natural energy sourcing. We talked about maturation using reusing barrels from other distilleries. Something you said about you don't own the land. This is just here for the next generation. I like to always talk about the future. So as you look to pass on this legacy to your children, what are some of the conversations that you're having with them about sustainability for the castle, and also for just some of the initiatives that you've implemented into the distillery today?
Yeah, so as I look at the kind of next generation and beyond, and my kids are growing up now, they're all still fairly young, but they've grown up, I guess, with dad and my wife Karina doing stuff on the farm and the Slane Whiskey Project. So I hope that they will legacy, if that's not too grand a word, but they'll be inspired to kind of deepen this desire and ambition to actually build on, protect, and enhance. So, hopefully we'll have some initiatives to treat the land a little kinder in terms of how we use it to cultivate our crops for the distillery, how we conserve our water supply, and indeed how we can improve the quality of the water by contributing to other local projects. So I would hope that they will take it to the next level, and they'll come up with innovations of their own as to how we engage with our community, how we extract value, but also give back to the land that provides the raw materials we need. And then in terms of the whiskey itself, Slane is designed to be shared and to build a community, and that goes to how we behave out in the market as well. So My brother is a chef, Wolf Cunningham, and we've had a lot of fun looking at how can, as we out in the trade with Slane whiskey and bars and restaurants, what can we do or encourage people to do there that tie in with that thinking. So we like to encourage the bar and the kitchen to talk to each other, for example. So if there's a potential waste stream that's coming out of the kitchen, how could that perhaps be repurposed as an ingredient for a cocktail program? Or indeed vice versa. If there's something that the bar's discarding or is not working, can they reuse that in a different way in the kitchen? Or just thinking about how you consume your ingredients in the bar. I mean, I went to one great account in LA, and they made a lot of mojitos in that account. They used a lot of mint. But when we kind of got talking about what Slane was trying to do, those guys actually developed a really beautiful syrup using the stems from the mint. So the stems would normally be thrown in the bin. They didn't use that. They actually made a delicious syrup with the stems, which still have the flavor. They just didn't look good in the mojito. So, and then fermented fruits, which often get discarded in a restaurant environment because they have to be fresh. You can actually ferment those and make some amazing umami note syrups for your drinks program as well. So it's trying to get initiatives like that going. And I think if we can start contributing to that conversation, that's something I'd like to see us deepening as we go forward too.
Final question. We talked a lot about community, and I'm more interested in the local community where you are. How does Slane promote sustainability, economic sustainability in your community in Ireland?
So, Slane is not just a whiskey, and it's not just a castle, and it's not just about us. It's a village as well, a beautiful village just north of Dublin. And our community is very important to us. There's always been a close relationship between the castle and the village. So quite apart from probably the biggest boost, I suppose, for the local community is actually the tourism that this distillery is going to bring in, because whiskey tourism, your members and yourself will be only too well aware of how successful the Kentucky Bourbon Trail has been. We would love the same to happen for Irish whiskey, and the Irish Whiskey Association, of which we're obviously a member, is working really hard to create that Irish Whiskey Trail through something called Irish Whiskey 360. And that is going to bring people into the village. And yes, they'll see the distillery, they'll see the castle, but they're going to need somewhere to stay, somewhere to eat, somewhere to walk. And so that spreads the benefit. So we like to see ourselves as contributing towards the tourism economy, which of course right now is pretty tough, but let's hope we get beyond that and people will start visiting again. And then we do directly support in some ways, financially, we provide a bit of direct financial support into Slane has something called the Community Forum, which is effectively a collective organization, all the voluntary organizations in the village, and we make a financial contribution towards that every year. And then, some of our people who work in the distillery, they live in the local community as well. So we try to maintain an open door for the locals and effectively become a positive contributor to our local economy and our local community. And I love living in this village. And if any of your members are lucky enough to come and visit Ireland, please do come and see the distillery, but make sure you take in some time to see the wonderful village, stop in the pub, have a drink, have some food, walk along the River Boyne. It's magnificent. It really is.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait for the day that we're able to travel and that I can come and visit you at Slane and the local community, and just see the country. I've never been to Ireland, so I really look forward to visiting you and the castle. So this wraps up our session on sustainability. And our next session is going to talk about the actual whiskey itself.
Yeah, we're going to do a deep dive into the tasting of Slane. So that's going to be a fun session. So looking forward to that.
Yes. So thank you again, Alex. And this has been a wonderful second session masterclass on Slane.
All right. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, cheers.